And we're back.
And we're back.
And so's ISIS.
They're ISIS, more or less.
Whatever. What are they called now? That's part of the problem. They changed the name, and then it was supposed to be like, surprise. Who are these people? I don't know. How did they get there? We should probably introduce this fella here.
Who him?
Hello, everyone.
It's Toño.
Toño.
He's our South American correspondent.
Yeah.
He's just flown in.
From Spanish SOTT
Yep.
to the world.
To the world.
Yeah. As an immigrant, someone let me in.
Yeah. I don't know how you get over that wall, but...
yeah. There was a hole in the wall, and I just crept in.
Well, you're here now, so that's it, you know. You're staying, you know.
Yeah.
Once you get in, that's it.
Toño is co-host of...
Yeah, the Spanish SOTT radio show.
What do you call it? What's your show called?
SOTT en español.
SOTT en español, okay. Yeah. It's not Atando Cabos. It used to be.
It used to be.
I love that name. That's Connect the Dots in Spanish.
Yeah, Connect the Dots,
Yeah.
So, been doing it for 10 years now.
10 years.
Yeah. Shout out to my boys and co-hosts.
There's an Alejandro in the chat. Is he one of your boys?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's a usual, a regular.
Yeah.
Cool fellow, Alex.
Well, apparently you're the man to talk to about geopolitics.
I am? Oh my God.
Hence you're here with the Korean nuke.
Oh yeah, with the Oresnik.
Superman.
With the Oresnik.
I'm with the Oresnik right here.
It's a nuclear powered Oresnik. Yeah, that's life size as well, right? Yeah, that's what.
Probably.
Pretty much the same size, yeah. So what did you say? ISIS is back? Yeah. Yeah, they are, yeah.
I mean, it's not the only news this week, but it's the most shocking kind of wham into the geopolitical sphere this week. The return of marauding terrorists. Well, this is what I want to ask, because I didn't see much about how it's being portrayed in, the news, the official news. I have a BBC article here. I'm curious. Are they gone back to calling them moderate rebels? What's the lingo these days? Let's put it up.
Immoderate rebels.
Yeah, this is the BBC's primer on the news, the latest developments in the Middle East this week. Who are the rebels? Rebels? What? Rebels. Okay, they're calling them rebels. Seizing control of Syria's second city.
Yeah.
My goodness. Oh, we've got a photo of the boys there.
Yeah.
Looking all jihadi. Oh, no, I mean rebel-y. Rebel forces launched the largest offensive against the Syrian government in years on Wednesday. By Sunday, they had taken control of, quote, large parts of the country's second biggest city, Aleppo, and were advancing towards Hama in the south. The surprise offensive, well, this is good news actually, prompted the Russian airstrikes on Aleppo, the first Russian strikes on Aleppo since 2016, and saw Syria's military withdraw its troops from the city. Is that true? They just left? That makes them sound all
some of them did, but
wimpy and regime falling-y. But the attack was led by Islamist militant group. This is where you're kind of reading with bated breath, because you want to hear ISIS or Al-Qaeda or even al-Nusra. Remember them? No, the attack was led by the Islamist militant group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS.
Sham is the word that you're focusing on. There, Sham. No, that's al-Nusra. That's al-Nusra. They just changed their name. They're the same thing as al-Nusra, which is the same thing as Al-Qaeda, which they haven't changed. They changed their name, but they don't change their ideology. They're a bunch of nutbags, right?
Heart-eating head choppers.
Yeah, they're liver-eating head choppers, and they're just. I mean, those people exist, and they're weaponized by Israel and the US primarily. This is from WikiLeaks back in 2012. Well, don't know when they released it, but this is Jake Sullivan, who was at the time it was an email from Jake Sullivan, who at the time was foreign policy advisor, senior foreign policy advisor, whatever, to Clinton in the State Department when she was Secretary of State in 2012. And it was released by WikiLeaks after the fact, and they were talking about the Syrian situation. And Jake Sullivan is now until January 6th or 20th, whatever. He's the
National
Security Advisor to in the Biden administration, and this is what he wrote to Hillary Clinton via WikiLeaks, not via WikiLeaks, but revealed by them. From him to her, see last item, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. There you go. What more do you want to know? Other than that, things are pretty good.
Otherwise, things have basically turned out as expected.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everybody knows. I mean, I was just checking, when the rebranding to HTS came. It was 2017.
Yeah. Whenever they were.
And there's usually I don't know, what do you call it? Just the inertia. Everyone knows the old name. So for many years after, it was still being called NewsReal, but whatever. They themselves were called HTS, Al-Sham. 2017, and you go to the US government website, and of course, there it is. It's listed. They officially see it as a terrorist organization. But between this and some other, I couldn't find it for the show, but I did find a statement, a more recent one from someone in the State Department saying that HTS are our guys in Syria. So, yeah, well, look, is this something everybody knows? Do we need to... I have questions, though, about logistics. Okay, we're going to have to recap. So Russia enters the fray in 2015 in a pretty spectacular way because it was new. No one has seen Russia exert itself like this. Never mind in a neighboring country. This is many steps away in Syria. 2015. And that's it. That's the beginning of ISIS being on the run. And no, Donald Trump, you did not defeat ISIS. Vladimir Putin got the ball rolling. It had been a couple of years of American, some British, some French airstrikes where they were, quote, getting Al Qaeda or Al Nusra, whatever, and yet their influence grew. Their territory, their influence and control of territories grew. I'm like, what the hell? There were many reports at the time of they weren't dropping bombs; they were like airdropping supplies. Those were only reported in like local Syrian and Iranian media. Never been verified in Western media, of course. But the fact is, the terrorists, ISIS, Islamic State in the Middle East, grew until Putin intervened, and then they were on the run. And it took a while, and it was stop start because Putin and Assad agreed that by this time there were so many terrorists. They had families. They brought their families with them. Some combination of both. So they would stop and start for ceasefires, humanitarian corridors. The terrorists would be being terrorists. They would keep being terrorists. So they were eventually corralled into Idlib province, the tiny bit of. It's the most northwestern province of Syria, bordering Turkey, and that's where it's been since. How many? Do you have an idea of how many of them were? How many fighters? What?
15,000.
15,000. How many are supposed to have poured across into Aleppo this week? We're not sure.
That's a total number.
Several thousand. The total number is around 15. Okay. So for 8 years, what are they doing there?
They're hanging out and living the caliphate good life,
Right.
They're living.
I presume
they're
the local
doing Sharia law.
Right. I presume they basically de facto created what they had hoped previously to have all over northern Syria and northern Iraq and Islamic State in the Middle East.
In a small part of it.
Okay, in Idlib province.
In Idlib city.
Wait, but what about Libya and Africa? They are in there as well, no? So probably they were just moved around, and then whenever they were needed, they will just show up there.
I don't know if there still is communication and transfer of people and weapons between those two places. But it wouldn't surprise me. We know that was happening to get it off the ground in Syria. That a large transfer of the same people went from Libya to Syria. So it definitely possible, and from elsewhere. I mean, Putin's and the Russian government has long been saying that there are tons of them coming from Central Asia that they've recruited there. That they could be Afghani, that they could be, and of course, prior to that, we know that at some point they were being recruited via Qatar from anywhere in the Middle East, or even further afield, Southeast Asia, anywhere in the Muslim world. I don't know if Qatar is still involved. They could be coming from anywhere, right? We know that Jihad Inc. has many tentacles. Joe's reported before about the weapons and how, in one instance, we now know from leaked documents that shitloads of weapons were coming in via diplomatic passport. That's a way of agents of whatever government, Western, being able to get weapons on a regular flight via Azerbaijan, via Bulgaria. There were depots of former Soviet, at least small arms, being collected and taken to Syria. That was about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. What I don't get is what froze the conflict in 6 years ago was a whole series of meetings between the only ones that were important. The US was on some peripheral meeting about Syria's future. The important meetings were between Turkey and Russia and Iran. Mm-hmm. Russia and Turkey had by now made up after the airplane gate when a Russian jet was shot down on the border with Turkey. Initially, Russia had sanctioned them, but Russia and Turkey kissed and made up and agreed to, let that be, so long as, I presume, the status quo of what we've had for 8 years, so long as that happened, so long as the conflict was frozen. Turkey's case was always, hang on a second, these aren't our people, but if Russia keeps bombing the last 10,000 or 15,000, we're going to have a massive refugee crisis from the surrounding, the civilians that presumably live in Syria and elsewhere in northwest Syria. And
it was.
I presume
a lot of immigrants came to Europe, fled Syria from Turkey, out of Idlib, city and province, and into and from the fighting in general in northern Syria into Turkey, and then some of them stayed in Turkey, and some of them went on over to Greece, and then into Europe. So there's a lot of Syrian refugees during that period of time that came to Europe. Anyway, yeah.
I wonder what size the remaining population, civilian, is in Idlib.
Don't know exactly.
Are there still a lot of people that your ISIS head chopper types can forcibly or ideologically recruit?
No. I mean, there's not a lot. There's not many people anywhere that they can forcibly recruit. You know what I mean? Especially in somewhere like Syria. They have to be. They're taken from disparate areas from Iraq. They're just a particular segment of humanity that is attracted to that kind of ideology, basically. The head chopping ideology, and they'll sign up, and they're obviously being paid as well. They're in it for money and all that kind of stuff, but they're in it for the ideology. So al-Nusra Front and stuff. You have to understand here that, I mean, the whole situation is very complicated, right? And people are blaming Turkey. Like, have you have any questions about it in terms of what's going on?
Well, yeah, my blink from people I follow, for the news, their take on it. About half of them are like immediately saying, Erdogan's behind this. This is his doing, because there were talks or the prospect of direct talks, Syria, Turkey, and they collapsed. And Assad complained about it. Apparently, that's been happening in recent days or weeks leading up to this, which isn't the only reason. The main, I sympathize with that view, by the way, because you ask yourself, it's a frozen conflict. Russia's got them hemmed in, or can threaten to do what they have been doing in the last few days in response, which is to just send out air sorties and carpet bomb whole, convoys of them. How can they do this?
Who?
This HTS group, how can they be rearmed with anti-air?
Well, they're capturing a lot of equipment as well. They have fairly basic, in a certain sense, or relatively basic equipment, but then they capture whatever they can capture. You know what I mean? These are just like a mercenaries for hire in a certain sense. And there's a lot of propaganda involved in the majority of the effectiveness, or a big part of the effectiveness of ISIS back in the day was about was propaganda around about how vicious and bloodthirsty they were and all that kind of stuff. Their head choppers, they'll cut your head off, all that kind of stuff. There'll be no taking prisoners. And that, depending on who they're up against, that can cause a lot of kind of like fear and trepidation. That if they're and they're also not, they don't care about civilians, right? So they don't follow the rules of war. That's what made them kind of relatively effective. ISIS, apart from the fact they're being funded from elsewhere, from abroad, but they the fear factor around ISIS, even for military recruits like Syrian military and stuff, they at that time when ISIS was running rampant across Syria in particular, and parts of Iraq and Syria, a lot of it was to do with them not following the rules of war at all. Just using civilians, killing civilians, and executing, and making videos and stuff of cutting the heads off people and all that kind of stuff. It causes a certain fear factor, especially from amongst younger recruits and stuff. If they hear that there's a bunch of ISIS all at the gates of a town that the Syrian army is trying to hold, you might have a bunch of desertions. You know what I mean? But in terms of them being supplied, I mean, they probably have stores of weapons. They're not being actively supplied now. They have weapons that they've had. I mean, there's other different types of ways that weapons can be airdropped to them covertly by Israeli, CIA, in the past, Gulf state airdrops or different lines of transporting weapons to them, all that kind of stuff. And obviously, those weapons stay. You know what I mean? They still have weapons. And they can, over a period of time, especially since 2009, since it's been relatively peaceful, there's been different ways where they can get weapons in. You know what I mean?
You would agree that just looking at a map, the obvious source for them to get it through geographically is Turkey.
That's one way. But, I mean, there's a question that isn't being asked here. You're saying you're reading that it's Turkey that's doing all this.
Most people
for
seem
what
to be,
point?
yeah.
For what purpose? That's obviously an immediate question that you would ask yourself. Why?
Yeah.
Well, the U.S. does have this base at the south, right? So, sorties from there and just dropping, via the CIA.
Exactly. Turkey's a NATO country. So there's kind of like, it's almost like there's two countries. There's Erdogan maybe on his wishes for sovereign Turkey. And then there's the fact that it's NATO stand. It's in another larger country. Absolutely. No, I'm always cautious about just singling out Erdogan and Turkey. People are... Yeah, they're probably wrong. Look, the most obvious thing is the sequence of events here. Well, that preceded this, that has nothing to do directly with this. Hezbollah and Israel ceasefire, which is holding, I think, 24 hours before this was launched. So in sequence, it's like the two things must be connected. They can't be otherwise. I think some of these terrorists are even quoted in their own videos or something saying that Hezbollah's weakened now. And that was another complicating factor. Hezbollah was one of the things that kept ISIS al-Nusra in check in Syria. They were fighting directly against them. That's part of the reason why the people's militia groups that came from Iraq, trained and or ideologically supported originally by Soleimani in Iran, they all share very similar logos. The Hezbollah-like logo, the Iraqis PMCs have it as well. So it's I suppose at the very least this opportunistic with Hezbollah down, not down for the count, but down certainly, that this happens now. The other obvious thing is, of course, we're at peak tension with the possible end phase in the Ukraine conflict. That's kind of like, for me, that's always the longer term context for anything Syria. The two things always dovetail. Since 2013, Syria and Ukraine have been not always a perfect match, but they both erupted at the same time. I think Syria was a bit earlier. There was a protest and the so-called civil war began earlier, but Russia's interest and the Ukraine conflict and developments in Syria have gone hand in hand so often in the last 10 years that, it's definitely related here as well. So, on the face of it, those with the most to gain from head choppers marauding through Syria again are Israel / the United States.
Well, okay, yeah, that's a different question. Why Turkey? What's the question? What's Turkey's interest? Why would Turkey be doing this? What was the question?
I don't know. I don't know. The one thing everyone says is Turkey wants to recreate the Ottoman Empire. And they show maps of where Turks and Turk-like people are. And it goes all the way to China.
Yeah.
And it comes down into Syria.
Yeah.
And there are Turkmen there, which is true. There are,
Yeah, yeah. No, well, I mean, obviously, it's a long history, and it goes back at this point, the actual Syrian Civil War and all that kind of stuff that Turkey has been involved in goes back to 2011, which is 13 years. But then there's been a history between Turkey and Syria as well, because, like, I mean, Turkey's longest border with another country is the Syrian border, and Turkey has a long history of problems with the Kurds, and the Kurds claim a homeland in the northern part of Turkey, which, you know, is just above the border with Syria. It's also above a part of the border with Iraq, and they've been separatists. So the Kurds have been separatists, trying to break away with their own homeland in northern part of Turkey. But there's Iraqi Kurds, there's actually Iranian Kurds, there's Iraqi Kurds, and there's Syrian Kurds. Just throw up a map there, Scotty, at Google Maps, and just go to that region, will you? Because it might be useful to have a look at it.
Yeah, I remember when Erdogan was stealing the oil from the northern parts of Syria.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting, and then he had to be saved from that assassination attempt, I guess it was, by Russia, presumably.
Yep, exactly. That was 2015, and that was more or less an American run assassination attempt. You have it up there, yeah? Okay, so there you go. See, so there's Syria, Iraq on the right, Lebanon, and Israel, little Israel, that shitty little country down below. So anyway, so the Kurds are the Kurds in Turkey more or less spans most of the northern, from like, say, the border on the left there with the Mediterranean border on the South Mediterranean border of Turkey, pretty much all the way over and into Iraq. All the way along in Turkey and extending down into Iraq and down into Syria. So you've got Turkish Kurds in the southern part of Turkey there along the border with Syria and Iraq. You've got Syrian Kurds in the northern part of Syria. You've got Iraqi Kurds in the northern part of Iraq. Iranian Kurds aren't much of a problem, but the Iraqi Kurds and the Syrian Kurds and the Turkish Kurds, or the Kurds, let's say, in Turkey have been a problem for Syria for a long time, and they've been defined as a terrorist organization, and this goes back way into the 80s and stuff, where Turkey's been fighting battles and wars with Kurds inside Turkey. But anyway, so to be brief about it, or just to sum it up, basically, Turkey's interest in Syria is to maintain its, and has been for the past 13 years since the Syrian quote-unquote civil war, is that immediately made Turkey nervous about the breakup of Syria, and especially with the West being involved, which they were, the possibility that the Kurds would be given the beginning or the opening up of the possibility for a Kurdish homeland. Because either if the Syrian Kurds get a bit of northern Syria in some breakup of Syria, which is exactly what the West wanted. They wanted to break up Syria, they wanted to kind of balkanize Syria in order to protect Israel, basically. And to keep Iran back, because there's a line over from, a kind of transport line effectively from Iran over into through Iraq and through Syria, and obviously Iran supporting Hezbollah in Lebanon. There's all sorts of economic possibilities there as well, in terms of that Iran wants to maintain in terms of its access to European markets, etc. So there's a whole economic aspect to it, but the problem of the Western attempt to balkanize Syria in order to, like I said, protect Israel at Israel's behest, and Israel being involved in it, the balkanization of Syria via a phony colour revolution and civil war, brought up the problem for Turkey of the Kurds getting a foot in for a homeland, let's say, their long-sought homeland, which would include, could begin in the northern part of Syria, and then extend into Kurdistan proper. Let's say Kurdistan actually expands across all those borders, but Kurdistan into Turkey. So Turkey has, as far as they're concerned, and this is something Russia has been, obviously, with talks and negotiations with Turkey and Russia over this whole situation. Russia understands Turkey's strategic interests in this respect that they can't have. They're not willing to allow the Kurds to set themselves up as an independent state in any of these countries, either Syria, Iraq, or even Iran, but particularly Syria and Iraq, and currently particularly in Syria, because of the threat that it would have to Turkish geographic, territorial integrity, basically. So, as far as I'm concerned, you have to separate out the different groups that Turkey is supporting and has been supporting in Syria, and the more extremist jihadi head choppers like al-Nusra that were back in the day supported to some extent by the Gulf states, but primarily by the US. We just saw a tweet from what do you call him?
Sullivan, yeah.
Sullivan talking about Al-Qaeda, i.e. al-Nusra, the same group being on our side. Now there's many different groups and they all splinter off and all this kind of stuff and they make different alliances and stuff, but ultimately Turkey's interested, huh?
Who would be the proxy forces in Syria that Turkey explicitly supports? And probably with weapons and training and the works and money, material support.
Who they support?
Yes.
They're basically various Turkmen groups,
right? Ethnically Turkish.
There's
Syrians.
Turks, Turks in Syria that have been in Syria for a long time, but were originally Turkish, and they're fighting against, among many others, against the Kurdish groups in northern Syria, Syrian Kurds and the Kurds, the PYG, etc. In Turkey itself and along the border there. So it's a very complicated situation.
Yeah.
But like you said, what stands out in all of this, in this whole complicated situation, is the time the period when this kicked off again. The green light being given to any of these groups and it was primarily this Al-Qaeda and the head choppy types of groups who are going to restart the Syrian quote-unquote civil war, to overthrow Assad, to balkanize Syria, take different cities and stuff, happened immediately after Israel's 3-month or whatever bombardment of attack on Hezbollah, and Hezbollah being supported by Iran. So Hezbollah is taken out of the game, and Hezbollah, like you said as well, had been fighting against al-Nusra and ISIS, etc.
Yes.
in Syria, which is essentially the US and Israel's mercenary force in Syria, because Syria is a problem for Israel and the US, because Syria is anti-American, basically. Syria under Assad has for a long time held out and has not given in to any offers and any enticements to, join the modern world and give it up and
join the rules-based order.
Join the rules-based order. They're basically Arab nationalist. They want America out of the region, as does Iran, obviously, as does Hezbollah, as does majority of the Iraqi groups.
That may be what Assad wants now, but you remember the interviews with young Assad in like the late 2000s, and he was on CNN or any other American media. He was even invited to visit the Queen in London and stuff. His wife's British and so on. He was trained as a surgeon there in London.
But they're all...
He was very much in the elite club.
Yeah.
So what exactly it is hard to define, but I think it comes down to he would not agree to do business the American way.
Yeah.
He wanted Iraqi, but it's close to Iraq, their oil resources to benefit the Syrian people. So maybe in a much greater extent than it would have ordinarily.
Yeah, well, there's that as well, but there's also the Israel question. The Israel question is front and center in all these conflicts, and for the countries that, like Syria and like Assad, who have held out all these years and said, look, there's a problem in the Middle East. There's many problems in the Middle East, but one of the ones that's the one that sticks out the most and has done for many years is Palestine, and there needs to be an equitable solution to Palestine. So unless you're willing to give that up, and he's not willing to give that up, he's saying, look, that's an injustice and it needs to be resolved, fairly and in a just way. And that just puts you on the out. You're no longer friends anymore, and then you're scheduled for a colour revolution, which happened in 2011.
Yeah.
And you're going to get overthrown. And then, but the other thing is that these groups that you mentioned in that BBC article, that they were moving south to, one of them was they were moved to and Hama. Now Hama, if you look at the map again, is and even there's talk about Homs as well further south, but Hama is right, further
Might
down.
just zoom in. Maybe it'll show up.
Yeah, well, can you zoom in a bit? Yeah.
Okay.
There it is. There, that's Homs and Hama. So so those routes, those roads, would be maybe main supply roads for Hezbollah. So this is an Israeli operation. That has the fingerprints of an Israeli operation, because the idea there would be to essentially try and get these jihadis and different groups to
cut off supply routes.
Cut off
to
Lebanon,
Hezbollah.
basically.
Yeah.
Surround Lebanon. You've
Right.
got the sea on the other side, but you've got Lebanon surrounded, and therefore...
This is a proxy move.
Hezbollah can no longer be supplied. Like, the whole point about it is Israel and the US are trying to deal a decisive blow against Hezbollah in Lebanon,
Yes.
right? They weren't willing to try and fight them directly hand to hand, so they just carpet bombed Beirut and different places, in Lebanon, and then they've called a ceasefire, and immediately they call a ceasefire, okay, but they say we're just and Netanyahu said this ceasefire is to change focus onto Iran. And it's to rearm, to give us some rest and rehabilitation, let's say, or recuperation for our soldiers. But the way he said this ceasefire was just a short-term thing. And at any time, if Hezbollah, and they've broken it multiple times already anyway, but they have stopped their intense bombing. But as soon as the intense bombing stops and they call a ceasefire,
a proxy force makes a move around Lebanon.
Exactly. To finish the job, let's say, look, we're not... And that was probably negotiated by the US. So the US is against, for all its sins, the US is against...
terror bombing
the Israelis
civilians.
continuing to bomb the entire country of Beirut and kill, hundreds of thousands of people. So they're like, listen, let's do something different. Let's reactivate our jihadis in Syria to surround Lebanon and cut off those supply routes to Lebanon. Now that they've been weakened sufficiently, Hezbollah has been weakened sufficiently, we'll now cut off the supply routes. We'll focus on Iran. And he said that explicitly in Netanyahu's statement about the ceasefire, right? It was to focus on Iran and to rearm ourselves, basically, rearm for the next phase, whatever. So that was the idea, bring the jihadis in, cut off Lebanon, and... cut off the supply route, so Hezbollah, now that's been weakened, it no longer gets any weapons. So
interesting. So Iran,
and also Iran and Homs there you see as well, which is right
Syria.
over, they're opposite the Russian base in Latakia.
On the coast there, yeah.
On the coast of Syria. So that's very dangerous for the Russians. So the Russians' interest there, see, Latakia is just a little bit further. You can see it's halfway up above Lebanon, right there. So the Russians have a base in Latakia. And the other thing that the Turks are very concerned about is is it Gaziantep? No. Anyway, that little piece of land there that's come down, see the border west of Aleppo, the border of Turkey that comes down. That
used to be Syria.
It is, yeah. So that's in dispute as well. That's
Yeah.
a long-standing dispute between Syria and Turkey, and it would also technically incorporate that could be incorporated into a Kurdistan or whatever. So basically, the Turks are concerned about territorial integrity in all along this border and the threat to their national integrity or to their territorial integrity, their national security interests, whatever. And the Americans, interestingly, the Americans, as much as you say the Americans are supplying the Turks, or the Turks are supplying the jihadis via NATO country, right? The Americans are supplying the jihadis via Turkey. That's what you guys were saying.
Yeah.
At the same time, officially and over these past 13 years, the Americans have been actively supporting and backing the Kurdish forces in northern Syria.
Northern Syria and Iraq.
Northern Syria and Iraq. They're fully behind the Kurds, and the Kurds are a terrorist organization who's trying to steal Turkish land. So you can see that the Turks are, but the Americans do that because that's a way to keep pressure on Turkey. The Americans are playing this duplicitous game as usual, where they're friends and enemies with everybody and anybody, depending on what's in their interest. But ultimately, they're trying to protect Israel, protect their own interest in the region, and keep pressure on Turkey. That's why they support Turkey's enemies, while also supplying some of the Turkish Turkmen militants who are in Syria, who are trying to protect their southern border. You know what I mean? So they're supplying Turkey's enemies and Turkey's friends at the same time in northern Syria for two different reasons. They're supplying Turkey's enemies in Syria, or Turkey's militants in Syria, because the US and Israel are interested in balkanizing and overthrowing Assad, but at the same time they want to keep Turkey in check by supporting and funding and arming the Kurds, who are a threat to Turkey, because that keeps Turkey not unstable, but it means that they have leverage over Turkey, because they don't trust Turkey as a NATO member either. You know, Turkey is very
pro BRICS.
Well, it's not fully on board in
it's not sanctioning Russia.
You know, so
that little province of Turkey that used to be Syria is Hatay province.
Hatay province, that's what it's called.
It transferred to Turkey in 1939. Do you know all of those borders? I mean, thank you for teasing out the different ethnic groups, never mind the different political issues among people all along those borders. But what they all have in common as well is that they are 100 years old this year. Those borders were all made up 100 years ago after World War One.
Yep.
Turkey's borders, Syria's, Jordan's, Iraq's.
But
all of them.
But this thing,
some a bit earlier, but whatever. It's 100 years since Turkey, as we know today, was defined as that, and Syria.
But this whole situation is there's a lot of propaganda. You've heard a lot of propaganda over the last few days. There's no report in the media about the fact that I think it's probably, I don't know how many days ago. It's like 3 or 4 days ago, and we don't even know when he went. But Assad was in Moscow meeting with Putin right around this time that this whole thing started to kick off, right? So this was anticipated. This was kind of known, obviously. This isn't something that came out of the blue for the people directly involved in it, They expected it to happen. And the interesting thing about it as well is that Syria, unlike the way when this happened the first time in 2011, the first Syrian revolution, this is nothing like that, because Syria, and i.e. Assad Syria, has the support of pretty much all of the Arab world in this situation.
That's right.
Egypt, Saudi Arabia, obviously Iraq, but Egypt, Tunisia, I think, was one, Saudi Arabia, Oman, UAE, Bahrain, and obviously Iran.
Syria was formally brought back into...
Right. And
the Arab League this year.
That's a function of the awareness, particularly among those Gulf states, of a changing global order. They're no longer fully behind anything, whatever America wants. America's interest in the Middle East, we're fully behind it. And if they want to overthrow anybody, we'll immediately get on board and help them. That's no longer the world we live in. And this is going to be very different, this situation. Assad's not going to go. As like he has to go, right? That refrain back in the day during the first Syrian revolution, it was repeatedly said he has to go. Assad must go. Assad must go.
Yes, the meme now. All the leaders who've said it have since
been kicked out. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not going to happen this time. People are talking. I mean, there's a lot of propaganda. Again, it's kind of like the ISIS effect. Oh, ISIS, there's word of them taking over Damascus, and people are like, "What are you talking about? I'm in Damascus. There's nothing happening here. It's fine. We're all out drinking coffee in the street and stuff." And even in the only place the only place that is of any significance right now is Aleppo, where they've tried to take over certain suburbs of Aleppo, but the Russians have kicked out, and the Syrian Air Force have been pretty much bombing them day and night.
They're not bombing Aleppo itself, are they?
No, but on the road too.
That city's already been...
Yeah, no. But they're kind of in the outskirts,
on the rear,
on the convoys on the way to there. So I don't think this is. To be honest, I don't think this is going to go very far. It's not going to go anywhere.
Flash in the pan.
Well, especially because you have pretty much all of the Arab states who are openly backing Assad.
Yeah, his return to the Arab League was the watershed earlier this year.
they're going to be supplying not necessarily weapons, not going to give troops whatever, but or necessarily weapons, but they'll even just as important as economic support. Lines of credit and all that kind of stuff, fuel, different supplies to keep the country going. Let's say, because you can do the opposite. You can try and strangle a country when it's under that kind of an attack. You can strangle it economically, but that's not going to happen. And the Arab countries would be front and center in having to do that and making that effective.
I hope they are, but the US has Syria sanctioned up the wazoo.
I know. Yeah.
They will punish.
But that's been
economically.
The case. That's been the
their
case.
Gulf allies for doing that.
Who?
No,
Saudi Arabia. Are you joking me? They can't do anything. They're allies. They're a special kind of ally in that sense. They're not the typical American ally. Like, especially at this time in history, the Americans can do nothing. Better not. Don't even dare think about pissing off the Saudis or any of those Gulf states.
Okay.
Because they're just, they don't need much encouragement to turn around and say, bye-bye petrodollar,
Yeah.
I do have a question, though, because it seems to me that in the 2011 it was sort of not expected, but it was Syria. Bashar al-Assad was the weakest, right? So nowadays it is not the case, as you have been saying. So kind of doesn't make much sense to steer things around. Maybe it is because of maybe they want to block the Iraqi militias from going into Israel as well.
Iranian, yep.
Right, so they are backed by Iran, and also Trump won, so that has to be considered to some degree. But my question would be: it is expected for Russia to get involved as it was in the past, or maybe just to have another front for them to worry about?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's many different potential benefits, let's say, for them to do this, but because you think like Russia's air force and its weapons manufacturing, and that's a question: is like, well, is Russia using everything it's got in Ukraine? Like, can it really not? It can't spare anything elsewhere? But apparently not.
No.
Apparently that's not the case. But it's the whole thing smacks to me of kind of desperation, a desperate move in advance of Trump coming in, because Trump, under his previous administration, he pulled troops out of this region, out of northern Syria. He actually pulled a bunch of American troops out of there, and he's advocated for moving troops out.
More of them, yeah.
Any that are in harm's way, he's like, bring our boys home type thing.
There's nothing but sand and death.
Yeah, exactly.
Syria, sand and death.
Sand and death. So.
But we do also know that there was a contingent of 500 he wanted out, and he was told it had happened.
Yeah.
And it never did.
Right.
And the State Department guy in charge boasted gleefully to the media after Trump lost in 2020 that we just ignored it.
Yeah.
He did bomb Syria, didn't he? And he threw them off.
The US must have done. You know what they did? They bombed ISIS and flattened cities in the process. What the Russians were accused of doing in northern Iraq. 2017, 2018. What's the city there? Erbil. And another one. Anyway, two ancient cities in northern Iraq in what's now, quote unquote Kurdistan. One of them was flattened. So yeah, they got rid of ISIS and a whole lot of people as well. And Raqqa, they were bombing in Syria. They were bombing Raqqa, the city of Raqqa. Remember that one on the Euphrates? Again, flattening the place. But then just east of there, in the northeast of Syria, that triangle, there were lots of reports, even during the Trump administration, of the Syrian army 1 minute facing either the SDF, the newly renamed Kurdish fighters, or ISIS/al-Nusra. Turn a corner and there's a US contingent. So there was murky CIA stuff, of course, happening in Syria while Trump. But it's like there were two things working at the same time.
Well, yeah, but the CIA is it's hard to get a handle on that kind of stuff, and that's been going on for 10 years before you arrive in office. It's hard to get a handle on who's doing what, and the CIA are running black budgets and black operations that are beyond congressional awareness at all. What I mean? It's like,
yeah.
But all he can do is make sure that the official troops that are there, if he wants to, he can get those out, you know what I mean? And then make sure that it happens. This time he's learned from the last time. The last time he says, get them out, and then they say, yeah, we got them out, okay, and then they didn't get them out. This time he'll have learned from that, and he'll say, okay, I'm going to try and make sure that it actually happens, right?
Well, Kamala had a misstep with that one, right? Saying that no troops were outside, you know, especially in areas like the Middle East. And the video of that guy saying, "Well, where the hell are we?"
Yeah,
then?
yeah. What do we do? Where are we? Yeah, yeah. Can you imagine if she would just, and under Biden, it's just like there's no oversight whatsoever. It's just let the CIA run America's wars, you know. But hopefully under Trump there'll be something different. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think this, like I said, this is a sign of a kind of a last effort move to try and do something in Syria. You know, to get as much out of the freedom that they have to organize these kind of jihadi operatives, and to affect some geopolitical goal before Trump comes in, because they don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what kind of they're not going to have the same freedom to do that, you know. But yeah, it's like that. Just put up that article I sent you, Scotty, if it actually loaded. It's just an example of what I was talking about. So this is from just a few days ago, well, 5 days ago or something. So this is before this all kicked off, a day or two, and you have Israeli aggression targets Syria's Homs countryside. We're just talking about Homs, right? Mm. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. Israel has been bombing Syria, like as we know, well as Beirut, for quite a long time. And what they've been bombing or what they've been attacking, according to them, have been Iranian, you know, weapons depots or groupings of Iranian officers or whatever who are in Syria. And Syria has been being used by the Iranians to supply Hezbollah. And so they basically just activated their jihadis in Syria in recent days as a second
front or proxy front.
A proxy front to try and cut off, like I said, Lebanon. But Russia being involved, I mean, it's kind of stupid that they would even do that. You know, Russia's obviously not, it's very much in Russia's interest that there's a stable single government in Syria under Assad, because Assad, you know, Russia's interested in kind of Arab nationalism, or let's say in the countries in the Middle East being under a government, ruled by a government that is, at the very least, isn't owned by America. They don't necessarily need it to be, you know, fully pro-Russian, let's say, but it at least should be a government that is interested in some level of independence and national sovereignty and being able to decide freely who it wants to align with. Russia wants a kind of like a more level playing field, let's say, an open market, you know, in the Middle East, at the very least. If it can get countries that are fully supportive of it, like Syria, for example, then that's even better. But it wants to maintain that, and that's why it's bombing these jihadis who would attempt to basically try and, again, it's a desperate attempt to do what they tried to do 13 years ago, you know, but it's not going to work this time, I don't think. There doesn't seem to be any panic. All you've got, really, the stuff you see on social media, even the BBC and stuff, CNN, etc., it's all propaganda. It's trying to say that Assad is teetering. He's almost going to fall. Oh, are they in Damascus? It sounds like they're at the gates of Damascus and stuff. And then you look and you go, it's not true. I say, why are you saying that when it's absolutely not true? Well, because you're trying to make it true just by saying it. You know?
Forward operating propaganda. Yeah, that's why when I first heard and saw the headlines, I was like, Jesus Christ, this is another way in which it's like 2016 all over again. Obviously, Trump's back, but also ISIS and. Mm-hmm.
But you mentioned,
but it's a mirage.
Yeah,
well, we're thinking. So you're going with flash in the pan for now.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be because those people those jihadis are ideologically driven. Yeah, a lot of them,
or money driven, which is
the money driven ones probably aren't as much of a problem as the ideologically driven ones. The actual, you know, jihadi caliphate, you know, ISIS types, because they'll just they'll go to the bitter end type thing, you know.
And do you know they
But they're going to have to be if they're moving south, if they end up moving south towards Homs or Hama, then there's going to be a counteroffensive. Like they're mustering forces. Like right now, there's a lot of Iraqis coming in. There's a lot of Iranians coming in to Syria to reinforce the Syrian army.
Okay,
and,
so this is
and there's going to be, and along with Russia, there's going to be another big wipeout, and there'll be no quarter given. Like, you know.
Do you guys think that this whole operation is maybe just a distraction for Israel to figure out how to deal with Trump? Because, you know, I mean, a ceasefire appears to be something that Trump is in favor of. So, well, let's just reactivate these guys that were always there available at least. And in the meantime, let's see how the wind blows until January. You know, when
I think they want to create facts on the ground before Trump gets in. You know, they want to try and do their best to create certain situations on the ground before Trump gets in, because it's similar to the situation in Ukraine, where NATO and the Ukrainians are trying to create facts on the ground, so that when they come to some negotiation over Ukraine, that they already have certain things in place, so they're not open to negotiation. You know what I mean? It's like if they have troops, if European troops are in Ukraine already, say they've taken over like they've moved into the western part of Ukraine, like Polish troops or German troops or whatever, are in the western part of Ukraine. Say they move in. For example, say they moved in next week. There's 100,000 NATO troops in there, and they've also mined a lot of the area on the Ukrainian side of the front line. Let's say in advance of Russian troops, they put down a lot of mines there, and they've already established several examples of them firing long-range precision weapons into Russia, and Russia hasn't actually, you know, nuked anybody. It hasn't escalated outside of Ukraine. If those three things are in place before you come to the negotiating table, then you're in a much stronger position to negotiate. You go, okay, so, you know, Putin sits down with NATO or Ukrainians and says, okay, what's the state of play? Let's look at it here. And NATO says, well, we've got 100,000 troops in Ukraine. We've mined this big area, and we've already established that we can attack your country with cruise missiles. So what? And you have these territories in Ukraine, and you want this. So how are we going to work that out? You know, what do we do? Maybe we could reduce our troop contingent from 100,000 to 50,000. We're given something. We're already compromising. What if we remove some of those mines? That's another compromise. And what if we say we'll limit our missiles into your country to 50 kilometers? There you go. I mean, we've given three things already. The things that we had to put in place before the negotiations, right? It's much better that we've done that rather than coming the way it is right now and not having anything. Well, any sacrifices we have to make will be losing. You know what I mean?
And then you give us back Kherson and Zaporizhia.
Yeah.
Right.
Disconnecting that.
So that's in their mind of setting it up in advance of any negotiations, and the same thing in Syria, in advance of Trump coming in and Trump saying, okay, I'm going to change this whole thing up and we're getting out of there and we're leaving Israel. Not that we're going to leave Israel on their own, but in different ways he'll probably want to do things that aren't good for Israel. So Israel and the pro-Israeli contingent, which is most of it in the deep state in the US, they want to establish or try to establish a certain configuration of the chessboard in the Middle East that Trump can't exactly turn around and say, or if he takes that away, they're not losing as much, let's say, you know what I mean? So yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere. But the interesting thing you said at the beginning.
Well, they've had 8 years.
Yeah,
these guys to grow or train or
just a little example of the kind of way the West starts this whole thing, not the West in particular, like let's say the US in particular, starts this whole thing. This was, you mentioned earlier on, the shoot down. This was in 2015 of a shoot down. This is the article I wrote on at the time. I think it was the only one who actually came up with this scenario, which was that there was a Russian plane was shot down over, I think was it in northern Syria, whatever, but it was near
Northern Syria,
near the Turkish border,
near the
anyway.
border.
And it was shot down from by a Turkish, quote unquote, by a Turkish F-16. So when a Turkish F-16 shot down a Russian jet, and it was really weird at the time. But it obviously the result of it was to sour a relationship between Turkey and Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a lot of questions at the time as to how, who actually shot that plane down, and then you realise that basically there's a bunch of American personnel at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, etc. But there's another one before that, actually. This is the Wikipedia entry on it that followed a similar pattern. Basically, there was a F4 Phantom. It was kind of like Turkish reconnaissance jet that was shot down in 2012 over the Mediterranean. Supposedly by Syria, by Syrian air defense, anti-aircraft guns or something like that, whatever was the official story. But if you look into the background on it, there was a suggestion that it was actually someone in the Turkish government said that actually it wasn't shot down by the by the Syrians. It was shot down by the Russians, by a Russian ship with an anti-aircraft missile. But there's more to it anyway. But that looks like pretty much the same thing, that it was probably shot down covertly by the Americans in order to, at that time, because that shoot down of that plane actually really set the Syrians and the Turks against each other and brought the Turks into Syria at that time.
Just as the 2016 incident was meant to set Russia and Turkey against each other, which they knew better, but they formally went through the process. Russia said, "You bad, we sanctioned you."
Yeah.
Sanctions lasted a year or something.
Or 6 months, yeah. So that's an example of how the US, those two are two examples of the US, most likely sows chaos, sets countries against each other, and if they're not smart enough to know that they're... But again, it gives them... It's a difficult thing to navigate because, the public, your whole public knows about it, you know what I mean? Yeah. And if it's like...
It hits the news, you learn with your public what's just happened.
Yeah.
And the emotional reaction has already started.
Right.
A chain reaction has started.
You have to go, oh, Syria's evil for shooting down our plane, even though behind closed doors it wasn't the Syrians. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, there's a report that the new leader of this latest batch of jihadis is already killed.
Mm-hmm.
Mohammed Jolani apparently might have been killed already in a Russian airstrike. So, and they're gone. Well, gone for now. Yeah. So going back to Netanyahu saying, "Well, now we're turning our attention to Iran," and then what comes in the news the next week? Syria. That's not Iran, but of course it's all of a piece. And it's not just Israel who sees the world that way. Like I mentioned before, these countries are only 100 years old. They were all the Ottoman Empire before that. Israel, of course, but the US too, looks at the Middle East like it's a wild west. It's just open. It's a frontier everyone's fighting over. Easy to exploit. Easy to set this group against that group. And the other thing I want to mention is what you said about Palestine. So, I don't know. I can count on maybe two hands, just from casual browsing. A lot of people I've noticed who are pro-Palestine, right? They've got the red arrows and everything. They're like, genocide. It's genocide. Damn you, Israel, to hell. They've got big followings now. Turn around. ISIS/HTS now is on the loose in Syria. Down with Bashar al-Assad. Assad, one of the few governments that actually supported Palestinians.
Mm-hmm. But there's pictures of those jihadis trampling on Palestinian flags and thanking Netanyahu for taking out Hezbollah because it weakened Hezbollah in Syria. I mean, they openly support Israel,
It's crazy.
but they're meant.
How do they fit
They're meant
that-
to be. They're meant to be Muslims.
How do they make that square that circle ideologically?
Factionalism. You can call anybody, you know, they can call anybody an infidel, you know. Those ideological extremists, jihadis, like anybody who's not like them is an infidel, you know, Arab or not.
Well, yeah, but they never call the Israelis infidels. They still can't
Well,
find Israel
yeah.
on the map.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's to show you. It's all, yeah. It's a lot more
Do you think
murky and nuanced than people realise.
So you mentioned that the Iraqis, presumably you meant by that the Iraqi PMUs
Yeah.
with Iranian backing are in the process of heading for Syria to
Mhm.
reinforce whatever they still have there that hasn't been bombed by Israel these last 10 years. Is that setting up for a battle, a wider battle? Or is it is such a flash in the pan that Russian airstrikes alone can contain this?
No, I mean you need the Syrian Arab army, Assad's
Yeah.
army, on the ground and as many reinforcements as possible to kind of deal with these people, you know.
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely doable, you know. They're not that big. They're not that. There aren't that many of them really, and Russia can. You know, if Russia, you know, obviously with Russian air power and stuff, that'll be fairly decisive in terms of swinging it in favor of of Assad and the Syrian government, and the Syrian military, and as long as that happens, which I think it will, then Russia can negotiate with Turkey to chill out and, as they did before, basically establishing kind of like safe zones in along the northern border with Turkey, put Turkey's concerns or ease Turkey's concerns basically over the whole situation, you know, and tell them to go home. It's not a problem, you know, but it's got to be super difficult, like to.
Is the Turkish military mobilizing at all?
No.
Any more than they already are because
No.
they have they've occupied for these
Yeah.
past 8 years a
No.
whole thin sliver of the border.
Yeah. No, they're not. And the thing about it is that, you know, yeah, there's all sorts of factional infighting in a certain sense. There's various different groups, and like I kind of tried to explain, there's different agendas. You know, basically, you have those Turkmen in the north who are lumped in with like these jihadis and all that kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
they're basically there to protect their areas that the Turkish government took in northern Syria, like a buffer zone basically inside Syria, to prevent the Kurds. And if there's a chance the Kurds will come in and try and, in this context at least, that's what happened before, the Kurds are fighting against those Turkmen who are basically working.
That's what troubles me.
Turkish
Next
militias.
week's news could be
Yeah, but that's only if
Kurds
the
joining the
Americans
fray.
will only be if the Americans can get the Kurds to be stupid enough to
Right.
go and kick the whole thing off again.
Right.
Because like you wonder if these people just don't have something better to do, you know, with their time. You know, don't you have a hobby or something? Go and play football, or you know, go for a walk. You know, I mean, I really
the
don't.
whole career is shit stirring.
Yeah. Anyway, so I don't think there's much to worry about, other than it's going to be a flash in the pan and a small version of what happened before that won't last very long. And it's all, like I said, in advance of Trump coming in. It's all happening very quickly, you know what I mean? Because there's a short period of time between now and January 20th, or even a bit further, obviously, on January 20th when Trump takes power. He's not going to do a bunch of things on that day, right? It's going to be a few months for them to get used to the situation and try and figure out how to do things, you know. So you've got a few months to try and affect the Israelis, and the American deep state have a few months to try and affect some changes that they'd like to affect in advance of Trump coming in. But with the Russians there, and especially with, like I said, with the Gulf states and most of the Arab world actually supporting Assad, they're not going to achieve very much.
It is intended to last for a few weeks maybe, because I mean, again, Assad is not weak anymore, and he has the backing of Iran, right? The Iraqi militias and all of that. So I mean, how much it could take for Assad just to crush these guys? I mean, not too much, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Especially the Russian air support,
One of these days. No, it's wishful thinking. It's been 8 years. One of these days, I keep thinking Russia's going to have to smack some
Russia's doing the same
Israeli
thing.
incursions into Syria. I mean, you're there to protect the regime, but it's getting smacked.
Yeah, well, they're doing the same
Key
thing.
military sites.
They've got various different people that need to keep
Happy all at once.
happy. They've got the Gulf states. They've got like Russia's friends, trying to make friends with everybody.
Yeah.
Especially in the Middle East, they've got their own interests in the Middle East, and they want to keep everybody happy, and they have to cater to everybody's interests and talk to everybody, and and sure, you could say people have said that before, like similarly in Ukraine. Look, just smack them.
Yeah.
Just blow the crap out of them. Just get on with it and do it. But that's not how Russia operates, and I think they can achieve a better outcome. Or avoid the negatives of doing that by, taking it more slowly and being more considerate and doing pinpoint strikes and being measured, when necessary, and in the long run it'll be a better outcome. So, but what about?
I want Oresniks in Idlib now.
Yeah.
Well, they can get there really quick.
Yeah.
14 minutes.
Not even 4 minutes.
It's, yeah.
Um.
You mentioned as if you were talking hypothetically, but it's a fact that there is, not a fact, there's a report of this 100,000 NATO troop ID in Ukraine.
Huh.
In your aside there about what a Ukraine settlement
But I've been saying that for weeks.
discussion might look like. Well, you said it for weeks, and then this week, this is from Newsweek, but the source is actually Russian. The headline there: NATO to deploy 100,000 peacekeepers, peacekeepers in Ukraine. Russia claims, so that it's the Russian SVR, that's their foreign intelligence service. Scroll down. Okay. Russia has claimed NATO is planning to deploy 100,000 peacekeepers, terrorists, whatever, soldiers in Ukraine as part of its plan to prepare Kyiv for revenge. Oh yeah, okay. That's Russia, seeing it from their point of view. The SVR believes NATO countries will occupy Ukraine under the guise of deploying a peacekeeping contingent in the country. No evidence has been provided for this claim.
Except European countries all talking about we got to prepare for war with Russia. We're open to the idea of sending French or German etc. troops to Ukraine. They say that over and over again, and then whenever Russia says you're going to send 100,000 troops to Ukraine,
Let's fact check
Newsweek. How dare you?
Newsweek, you're going to be fact checked. This is a report from January this year. Reuters. Macron does not rule out Europeans sending troops to Ukraine. He then repeated it in May.
Right.
And we made fun of him at the time. We're like, what is he thinking of?
No, but this was all in advance. This means that 1 year ago, almost 1 year and more, because they were talking about this before that. So more than a year ago, they were already planning.
Yeah.
They knew that Ukraine was going to lose.
Yeah.
They could drag it out for another year, but they knew, because that refers to peacekeeping troops. At the time in January this year, 10 months ago, 11 months ago, everybody thought this was, we're going to send French troops to actively engage in the conflict and push Russia out of Ukraine. It's like, no. This was preparing the population for the idea, and you got to seed it long in advance and get people used to the idea so that when you actually do it, everybody's been acclimatized. Everybody, I've heard about them sending, French troops. Yeah. And of course, people in Europe would accept it if it was done under the guise of peacekeepers, right? I mean, that's not dangerous, right? You're just keeping the peace,
This is how the Vietnam War escalated. First it was advisors, and then it was a large contingent. I don't know if the Americans ever called themselves peacekeepers, but it was always to protect South from North Vietnam. Incrementally, Arab and the Camel, little by little. And it went on for 20 years. It began in 1945. By the time JFK became president in 1960, he learned after taking office that we had anyone in Vietnam.
They don't have 20 years.
They don't. One more piece of evidence for Newsweek. No evidence to back up Russia's claim that NATO is preparing 100,000 forces to move into Ukraine. This summer, NATO held its largest ever exercises with a contingent of 90,000 forces.
Well, Trump did say that the security of Ukraine was a task for the Europeans. Maybe this is that, no?
Yeah, he's definitely going to want to push that back on the Europeans. Say, look, ultimately this is your war, even though they've been funding it mostly. Well, they've been more or less 50-50 between America and Europe, but Trump's attitude is this is on European territory, and he lives in America, which is far away across the ocean, nothing to do with us. So, okay, we were involved, but we're leaving now, so y'all handle that.
And the Americans can still be, advisors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They will be. Yeah.
They definitely will.
It's about body bags. It'll still be America's satellites, their bases, their weapons, their everything. The European military, maybe France has a decent military.
If the Europeans are left alone,
Germany has none.
If the Europeans are left alone, Ukraine, well, they have personnel. They can just put personnel.
Yes,
there
personnel.
That's what peacekeepers
meat
are.
bags, send them in.
But that's well, not even meat bags. They're peacekeepers, right? And this is just going to be to hold a certain territory, and it's like the peacekeepers in Lebanon, right? The UNIFIL peacekeepers there. They've just got guns and helmets. That's it. They're there to keep the peace. So that's what these peacekeepers will be, and they'll be in certain areas of Ukraine, and they'll be within shouting distance of Russian peacekeepers on their side of the line, and then at Christmas they'll have a football match, and then suddenly, to America's horror, Europe will reconcile with Russia, and they'll all be friends again over a football match, and then it'll all be for nothing at all. It'll all have been for nothing.
Do you think the Russians sounding the alarm here? Is this something else they will try to establish before Trump?
What?
NATO forces.
That's what I said. Those are the three things that I talked about earlier on.
Yeah, before January.
No, you've got. Well, it depends, but you've got before peace negotiations, whenever they might be. In advance of peace negotiations, we have to sit down at the table and talk about how you're going to work this out. Those are the three things I was saying.
I'm just trying to picture Trump giving the okay for American troops.
No.
So
This is
it will
European
be
troops.
100,000 NATO, but no Americans.
No Americans. No.
Are there even 100,000?
The Poles, I think we were talking about this
Poles.
last week. The Poles would take Western Ukraine, a chunk of Western Ukraine. They'd probably give the Germans a bit in the middle or something like that, further in, or maybe give them something. Romanian troops would be in the southern area of Ukraine up against Romania and Transnistria and Moldova, and you might put some Germans along the northern border or something like that. Who knows if allowed, and that bit, yeah. Brits maybe somewhere, I don't know. No, Germans in the middle, Brits at the top. I don't know. Something like that. They have some idea. It'll be spheres of influence. It'll be like Sykes-Picot after the First World War. It'll be mandates. The Polish mandate, the Romanian mandate, the German mandate, the British mandate in this section of Ukraine. And then Russia will be like, well, if it's just guys with a gun and helmets, then fair enough, But that's just.
But our missiles will still fly over their heads to hit incoming resupplies for the Ukrainian military.
No, this is the end of the conflict.
Right.
This is peace negotiation. Remember.
I know, but you got to get the troops in there first without being hit by the Russians. I accepted that. Here they come. Here comes the fact on the ground. Okay, now let's do the peace.
But Russia won't do that.
Yeah, I don't think that.
If Russia won't do, if Europeans send in, there's another bluff where they'll stare Russia down, play a game of chicken, stare them down, and they'll bet that Russia won't attack any contingents of, if it's just troops called peacekeeping troops, and you put in 10,000 or 20,000, whatever, here there in different places, Russia's not going to attack them. Because they're not attacking Russia, and they're there for peacekeeping duty. They're just occupying the soil. They're not coming in with Tomahawk cruise missiles over their shoulders. They're not coming in to man any offensive military weapons. They're there for peacekeeping. So this is another where they'll stare Russia down. They stared Russia down in so many different ways, and they'll stare them down in this way as well. And Russia will go, okay. Because that's just a temporary measure anyway. Then you have the negotiations, and the main thing is deciding what way that even those areas of Ukraine are politically aligned, and where the map is, where the borders drawn, and who holds sway, you know what I mean? who's ruling from Kiev, who's the government. You can have a bunch of like European, Polish, Romanian, German, whatever troops in Ukraine, in any part of Ukraine. Russia is fine with that as long as the president, who will not be Zelensky, the president in Kiev is best buddies with Putin. He'd be like, yeah. Russia would be like, fine, yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you guys can stay there. I don't know if you want. We can maybe bring you some tea, cookies, whatever. What do you want to do? Yeah, stay there for as long as you want.
Yeah, but the likelihood of those contingents of NATO forces not being cover for people firing stuff at Russia is surely low, given that that's what's happening without any formal NATO presence.
What do you mean, people firing stuff at Russia?
Storm shadows, attackums.
Well, wherever those are fired from, those places will be attacked, and it'll be the Polish and the Romanian and the German troops and commanders' stupidity or their fault if they put them beside a battery of or whatever a missile launch site. Basically, it'll be a bad idea to do that. But there's this picture that is good to remind them. I don't know if it's actually true or not. It's the only picture on the web of an alleged result of the Oresnik.
Wow.
Without a warhead.
It looks to me like it could be a mine. I don't know. Although it doesn't really look, obviously it could be a composite or a made-up image. You know what I mean? It's hard to know. It's the only one that I've seen that I think actually exists of an alleged result of that strike. Now, it's kind of weird to have one guy standing there for reference and all that kind of stuff.
Too cinematic, no?
It's a bit cinematic, isn't it? But it may fit with the kind of destruction that those missiles do, those missiles cause, or those vehicles, as they call them, And like I was saying to somebody yesterday, while the firing of that missile was a warning, what it really was, it was a warning, obviously, or a message to NATO. But what it really was the Americans, NATO, in their war, proxy war against Russia in Ukraine, had been pushing the envelope all the time, pushing the line, pushing, right, in various different ways, crossing Russia's red lines, in the belief. And accurately, because they were not that stupid, that Russia wouldn't respond. Russia can't respond to any place where we push the line, where we allow Ukraine, i.e. we fire missiles into Russia, further into Russia, precision missiles. And Russia's going to go, you better not do that. And then we'll be like, yeah, well, is that all you got? You got nothing. You're just shouting at us,
Yeah.
Because your only options are to, what, you're going to use a nuke. You talked about nukes and stuff, but you're not going to use nukes. And Russia's not going to use nukes. So that's off the table. That's just talk. That's just bluster. The only alternative, the only other option would be to use, as far as they're concerned, use maybe conventional. They probably had the idea that they could use conventional ballistic missiles, against Ukraine, or maybe, probably not as well, but maybe outside of Ukraine. But the problem with that is that they're the ones who then escalate outside of Ukraine. So they have Russia in a bind all the time, where like this conflict is in Ukraine. It's between you and Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with NATO. And you won't dare escalate it outside. You won't fire one missile, and you haven't in this whole conflict fired one missile, not even a small one, outside of Ukrainian borders. You haven't hit any European target, any NATO country target. No matter what we did.
No matter how many times we tell our people through propaganda that you're just about to.
Yes,
which is to stop you doing it.
Because it's escalation, and because it would be, what do you have? Like, you're not going to do nukes. You're not going to escalate outside of Ukraine, because then that might lead to nukes. If you even fired, what do you have? You've got some ballistic missiles, whatever. Even if they're, like, most ballistic missiles go at hypersonic speed, after the launch, sometime after the launch.
Yeah.
When they're at full power, like. But the the vulnerability, the weakness in ballistic missiles is that they take a long time to get to hypersonic speed, relatively long time to get to hypersonic speed. And then they're vulnerable to being shot down. So you might have a scenario where Russia might fire a ballistic missile at Poland or something like that, but chances are we'd shoot it down because we've loaded Poland full of aegis ashore anti-missile defense capabilities.
Maybe even THAAD,
etc. So we'd shoot it down, and then you'd look really bad because not only would you have escalated, because we'd be able to broadcast to everybody that you fired a missile at a big missile, a ballistic missile at Poland, but we shot it down. It wasn't even effective. You looked really bad, Russia. You escalated and you failed. Super bad. So that's what they think they had on Russia. They've basically got them cornered. They can't do anything. So then Russia reveals this Oresnik missile, which
can't be shot down.
Totally changes the game, right? Because not only can they not shoot it down, so it's guaranteed effective, but it's kind of like a sniper rifle, more than a missile in a certain sense. You know what I mean? Because because it has no explosives. It can have explosives, but it doesn't have explosives. Mm-hmm. At least in this example that they use,
yes.
So we assume that that's what they're pointing to.
Yeah.
There's no fallout. It doesn't cause destruction over a wide area. It's not like it doesn't fragment in that sense. It doesn't have high explosives in it, but it hits pinpoint targets. And I mean, I don't think this picture is probably accurate. It's probably not that size of a hole, but it's kind of like a sniper rifle where it could be fired.
So it's a means of long-range assassination.
Yes.
So
which means that...
Is Russia signaling we could take out people in Brussels, London, Washington, D.C.?
In the extreme type thing, but maybe more locally, they could take out one building or a few buildings at a NATO military base.
And underground, that's the key part.
In Poland, an underground base where there's a bunch of NATO officers, maybe Secretary of Defense of some European countries, and they'd be dead. And Russia would be like, there's nothing to get worked up about. I mean, it's just a small hole in the ground. There's no nuclear fallout.
And so-and-so wasn't officially there, so you can't really report it.
So, now that we've done that, we can carry on. Let's just get back to it. Nobody needs to get worked up about it. Nobody needs to talk about nuclear war or anything like that. We just responded as we saw it appropriately to you having fired your missile. And this would happen in the event that NATO used one of their long-distance precision weapons at some strategic base in Russia. And they would simply be responding in kind. So it wouldn't be Russia that escalated, it would have been the West that escalated. They turned around, it's you that escalated by using these longer range cruise missiles or whatever at one of our sites, and you deliberately targeted our top level officers or whatever, and one of our strategic sites. So we just responded by taking out one of yours.
I do have a question there.
And that's the end.
So establishing facts on the ground, this 100,000 soldiers and all of that, but along comes Russia with this magnificent piece of engineering, I assume, and they don't have a leverage anymore, right? So how are they going to negotiate with that? I mean,
at the negotiating table.
Yeah.
Well, that's Russia's, in a sense, that's Russia's response to the idea that they'll have more leverage at the negotiating table or whatever. This is Russia's response to their attempts to do that, to weight the negotiations in NATO's favour. They turn around and reveal this weapon and say, look, we initiated this war, a defensive war in Ukraine, and we're going to win. That's what, you hear Putin say it all the time. The objectives of the special military operation
will be achieved.
Yeah. We're not stopping. We're going to achieve what we set out to achieve. And if you try to stop us, we'll kill you. We're just saying, we don't want to kill you. But
if you get in the way,
look, we're
you're
going
in the way.
over there to, eventually we're going to get to that position. And it's non-negotiable. And in fact, it's none of your business, really. You don't really have any skin in the game. It's like this is our backyard. This is a country that we were friendly with. We had for a long time. It used to be part of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do with you. What are you doing? What are you even doing here? So go away. Yeah. Leave us alone. And they say, no, we're going to harass you. Well, okay,
Democracy.
Do that, but we're going to achieve the objectives. And we're just warning you now, we're not going to deviate from it. We're going to achieve it. And if you think you can use all these different techniques and strategies to stop us, we'll kill you with one of our missiles.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a choice. We're not being rude or mean or anything. We're just saying, don't fuck with us. And we're not being, justice and right is on our side, because the origin of this conflict was that you basically tried to attack us. You basically overthrew a government that was friendly to us on our southern border in 2014. You installed a kind of Nazi, virulently anti-Russian regime.
And then armed it to the fucking teeth.
Armed it to the teeth, trained 600,000 soldiers to NATO standards with a view to invading eastern Ukraine with ethnic Russians, with a few million ethnic Russians, mass murder. And then you'd be right on our borders and we don't know what you're going to do after that. You're going to invade Russia? Well, no, that's why we invaded Ukraine, to stop you doing this. And we're going to make sure that you can't do it again. We're going to put things back to the way they were before. So, and if you try to stop us, you're the aggressor. And if you try to stop us, that'll be another aggressive act, and we'll kill you. We have a limit, it's self-defense, and we will kill you if you try to stop us securing our country on our borders, like any country would do. There's nothing evil or, Putin's a dictator, or he wants to recreate the Soviet Union, he wants to take over the world. If we don't stop him now, he'll be
in Estonia by lunchtime.
And then he'll be in Western Europe, he'll be in Portugal by next week. And then one week after that, he'll be in Washington, D.C.
Now they don't have to. Now really they don't have to. The missile will do it for them.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Number one on their list of targets has got to be these places. Do you remember this from January this year? Is it January? February. New York Times special report, February 2024. The spy war. How the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. Nestled in a dense forest, the Ukrainian military base appears abandoned and destroyed. Its command center a burned out husk, a casualty of a Russian missile barrage early in the war. But that is above ground. Not far away, a discreet passageway descends to a subterranean bunker where teams of Ukrainian soldiers track Russian spy satellites. Ukrainian soldiers, really, and eavesdrop on conversations between Russian commanders. The underground bunker, built to replace the destroyed command center in the months after Russia's invasion, is a secret nerve center of Ukraine's military. There is also one more secret. The base is almost fully financed and partly equipped by the CIA. And if you scroll down after the image, 2 images there, the first paragraph. The listening post in the Ukrainian forest is part of a CIA-supported network of spy bases constructed in the past 8 years that includes 12 secret locations along the Russian border.
Wow.
That's the job for Oresnik, right there. I'm sure if the New York Times could publish it, the Russians obviously know where they are, or at least have a good idea. It's amazing. Maybe they have hit 1 or 2 or something with other, like the Kinjal or something.
Well, the Oresnik, one thing that I noticed was that it didn't even hit deep into Ukraine. It was along the Dnieper River, Zaporizhia, something like that.
Central, yeah. Well, center east, yeah.
They say that it was an old Soviet base or something like that.
It was. There might have been some symbolism to it because today it still is a weapons plant.
Yeah,
and that's what they did advertise that. They said when they hit it that it was part of Ukraine's military-industrial complex today. But yes, additionally, it was the number 1 site in Soviet Ukraine's military-industrial complex. So there was a kind of double message there, which if you refer back to Putin's speech when he announced the Russian SMO, one of his last lines was something like, so you want to decommunize Ukraine by tearing down statues of Lenin and removing the Russian language and all this stuff. And he goes, fine, we'll help you do so.
We'll help you.
And then cut transmission. So
Yeah. Here's a good example, just swinging back to the Syrian conflict. This is a good example of what's going on in Syria.
Syrian army, Syrian rebels, African, Saudi, Chechen, Egyptian, Libyan, Turkish, right?
Afghan. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, quote unquote, Syrian rebels aren't, none of them are from Syria.
Yeah. So I've seen other ones as well where they're like captured Syrian soldiers. They look different. They look much more European, more like Caucasian.
Mm-hmm.
And then your so-called rebels, Syrian rebels, are like obviously from Asia or elsewhere in the Middle East.
Yeah, it's that's a tactic that's as old as modern warfare, like mercenaries, like the Romans.
Yeah.
The Romans use mercenaries, from all sorts of different places to wage wars in different places, depending on how on the need, So it's not something that's new,
Yeah. But people it's not new, but yeah.
People don't know it.
It's like the idea. I mean, I think people are smarter to it now. But do you remember? You remember 10 years ago, 2014, ISIS arrived on the scene. The black flag, the beheading videos, the orange jumpsuits. People were they ate it up at face value. What you see is what you get. That really is an emergent Islamist. They just came out of the desert, somewhere between Syria and Iraq, and just started cutting heads off, just like that. Because Islam. How many people jumped on that and just said, "Well, that's Islam for you,"
Exactly,
and boom.
Yeah, it was propaganda, on two counts. One aspect of the propaganda was for Western audiences to make them,
remember the war on terror.
Well, and to see Muslims as head choppers, basically. And it was happening at the time. If you remember, ISIS was on the march at a time when vast amounts of Muslims were coming from the Middle East into Europe.
Yeah.
So the contrast of the juxtaposition of those two things just freaked people in Europe out. You know what I mean? So it tried to set the scene for a kind of like, civil discord in European countries where you have Muslims, but it also had the effect of making ISIS seem like this, like they're like a bunch of orcs, you know what I mean, out of Lord of the Rings or something, you know what I mean, and it's to strike terror into the heart of the Syrian, primarily the Syrian Arab army, because a lot of those guys are relatively young, wouldn't have seen much in the way of conflict, you know what I mean, and to think that if you caught one of these guys going to cut your head off, you know what I mean, and film it and put it on the internet, it's like it has an effect, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, but you notice how quickly they just disappeared, you haven't heard of ISIS for the past 8 years now, 7-8 years. They just disappeared, and then suddenly they can reignite, and then suddenly they can go away again. Then
there were a few sort of at least at the level of narrative making. There were some stabby jihadi incidents in continuing 2018, 2019, then COVID, and I remember the news report.
Yeah.
ISIS has put out a statement advising their fighters in Syria to stay at home and to remember hand, space, whatever. They used the same shite. that was the end of ISIS for a while.
Yeah.
And terrorist attacks.
All of this in you're from Mexico, right?
Yeah.
None of this is relevant in terms of, are there Muslims in Mexico?
There should be, but
you don't see them.
A small population, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they don't go around stabbing people, or.
No, we have other type of, other people are taking care of that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You got cartels.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's different, yeah. There's something manufactured about it all, at least the Muslim thing, but even, I'm sure there's something manufactured in the sense of, like the cartels in Mexico and stuff.
I keep saying that all the time, right?
That it's made up.
It's completely made up, right? I mean, the cartels, there's no way these guys are actually in charge.
Right.
There's no way they are in charge. They must have the support of the three-letter agencies all over the place, right? So
Mexican, not just. Well, what do you mean? Which three-letter?
Americans, of course.
American.
Yeah.
What about Mexican?
No, my theory, and I must state, and it's a disclaimer that it is just that, right? Is that the Mexican generals are also involved, right, in stirring up a faction war between cartels. So that means that the Mexican generals, they do respond to the North Command in America. They are in direct control because they are most of them are CIA. So that means that remember, I'm not sure if you heard that this old legendary capo called El Mayo Zambada was recently captured. He was delivered by one of El Chapo's sons. Right, to the U.S. government agents. And I think it was on behalf of the Biden administration because the administration wanted just to have a pretty nice headline for them to, boast around and, to prop up.
We're dealing with the cartels.
Exactly, with the border thing. So that means, it's pretty strange because the El Chapo son, by doing this, he committed treason by Mexican constitution, meaning that you cannot give a fellow Mexican to a foreign government. Right. So, and it was pretty easy, right, to convince El Chapo son to do this.
Yeah.
So, and El Mayo now is in a prison, and he has steered some more faction war inside of Mexico because you have on the one side those are loyal to El Chapo and the cells that have come from the Sinaloa cartel, and then you have on the other side. It's a huge mess.
Yeah,
similar to what's happening with the Kurds and with everything around the Middle East.
Factions and infighting,
and then there can be an incident that gets the headlines, and then it's all stirred up again.
Yeah,
and the incidents are often that sounds like it's contrived. Get me a political conviction.
Yeah.
For my election reasons, or
absolutely.
So I look good, but at the same time, it's also helping to
keep everything tense in in the area, right? So recently, a lot of violence in the Sinaloa state as well. So it's coming and going, and depends on whatever the political climate is and whoever wants to score a political achievement, I guess.
And it has a long history, obviously, right? The drug trade in
the 70s.
In the South America. And, the idea would be that, somebody's going to... there's always going to be someone in countries where there's a history or where drugs or cocaine, whatever it is, are produced. Someone's going to do it.
Yeah.
So someone has to control it. That's how it starts off, right? You can't, unless you're just going to wipe it out, but there's no motivation to wipe it out completely. There's no motivation to outlaw the growing of
nowadays it's just fentanyl,
right,
coming through,
and that's made in a lab, so that's even harder to control.
It's in a lab. It doesn't require land to grow, right? So, but they do have laboratories in the Mexican Sierra, near Sinaloa, north of Sinaloa. So, yeah.
And is your understanding that this was ultimately obviously the original drug trade was in South America or whatever, but then the CIA came and decided to use it as a way, as they did in other parts of the world, to make money.
Yeah, of course,
for black budgets.
That's
one way that they make money.
That is one really nice and easy way to make some money. Also, just to introduce this poison into the American society. You remember in the 80s with the crack thing around, LA and all of that. It was all propped up by Oliver North and the Iran Contra thingy. So it's all used for different
population
purposes.
control.
Population control, essentially, right?
Yeah, and it's just got out of control at this point.
I guess so. It's all over the place. It's in Europe, of course. It's in other parts of Southeast Asia.
Is there much of a problem in Mexico with fentanyl or other kinds?
Well, you do hear a lot of government issued messages on the radio saying this is a huge problem, and you hear it a lot. So it is a problem, or it should be a problem. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
And it seems to bring out the worst in people,
But
and there's some pretty horrific stories about what the cartels...
And it's very effective, right? Just a small amount of that thing can really kill you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I've heard that the Mexican position on this is always to say the biggest problem is American demand.
Oh, it's been like that for decades.
And then the Yanks say, well, you're just deflecting. You're the one allowing it through. And they're like, hang on a second. The demand is insane in the United States.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. Well, there have been 2 elections this year. Let me ask you first about Mexico's. What do you think of the
Fair? It was fair. Yeah, I believe it was fair because the lady that got elected is the AMLO's protege.
Okay.
So I believe that it is. I keep saying that it was second. It was AMLO's second election, actually, right?
Right. In Mexico, you can only run for 1 term.
1 term, 6 years.
Right.
So, AMLO ran 2 times prior.
And lost.
And lost.
Lost. Okay.
So, I will say that I don't believe that he actually lost. It was taken from him. Just it's controversial, but I do believe it is the case.
It's okay. It happens.
Right. It happens. And afterwards, then he was it was a very fair election in 2018. It was, and then now it is the second official election that he wins in ideological terms.
Yeah.
Right. So let's see what happens.
It should be more of the same.
Apparently.
What's her name?
Claudia Sheinbaum.
Claudia Sheinbaum.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question, obviously, is the other election. What do you think of Trump?
Yeah, I don't believe Mexicans particularly like him.
Oh, yeah?
Right. Propaganda. I mean, a lot of propaganda because, of course, it has to do with immigration, right?
Uh-huh.
So it is a touchy subject for all Latin America, in general. My particular position is that he will be, it is good that these things are happening because it is a bloodbath at the border in the sense of there is a lot of human trafficking, a lot of drugs. It is overall just nasty, and there was a need for a willingness to end the problem, and I believe that Trump will bring that. But if you ask perhaps someone on the street in Mexico City, they will say, Trump is
he's anti-Mexican.
Bad orange man, I guess.
Right, orange man bad. So that's the same in Western Europe.
Right.
I mean, he still polls way below. Most Europeans thought Kamala Harris was going to win. Never mind, most would have supported her as well.
Yeah.
I think. So yeah, that makes sense, obviously, because Trump first became notorious because of the wall. And it was easy for the media to portray him as just being flat out anti-Mexican.
Yeah, super easy.
But of course, he had a lot more in his mind than.
Yeah, and that comment about they are all rapists and murderers and all of that.
It was easy to suggest that he was saying that about
everyone,
America's neighbors, but he was talking about people coming through Mexico,
right?
Obviously.
And especially the criminals that are going there, because obviously there are. Right, so
Mexicans themselves obviously want the border. They want it cleaned up. I mean, this is maybe that's not obvious. I mean, I know there's a lot. I've heard stories about the amount of grassroots popular support for the cartels. Is it mostly terror, or do they genuinely serve as a kind of surrogate state in some senses because the state itself is not effective?
Well, you mean like doing some good deeds?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good deeds. Basically running alternative services.
Yeah, that's what the...
or is that propaganda I've heard here that makes the cartels look good? I don't know. I'm open to...
I mean, I do believe that happens. honestly, they do, I guess, build schools and all of that. I mean, it would be fair to say that they do, give back, I guess, in that way. But it is, a fallacy just to think in those terms, right? Because they do extort business people in Mexico as well at the same time. How do you reconcile both ideas? On the one hand, they do some good, but on the other hand, whenever they are fighting for a route or a city with another cartel, well, they resort, and if they are short of funds, they do resort to extortion and to kidnapping and to murdering people. And just a couple of weeks ago, someone stormed into a restaurant and killed 15, 30 people. How do you reconcile one thing with the other? I mean, it's just it's not a valid argument anymore.
Do you think, if asked, would Mexicans like to see happen in their country what's happened in Salvador?
I believe everyone will agree with that. Sure,
that would be a hit. That would be popular.
Sure, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's not only there. I mean, constantly you see on the Twitter comments, "Oh, we need this guy in in Argentina. We need this guy in Brazil.
He's
we need this guy
the world over.
all over the world." Yeah. So
Salvador's a small country, though. You can do that.
Yeah. Well, it's like 10 million people.
Yeah.
Something like that. So it's not.
Is it that many even? I think it's smaller.
Right.
I think it's smaller. And they had something like he numbered them. They had 40,000 criminals.
Yeah, 70,000 in prisons already.
Okay.
So, well, that's the last number I have.
Yeah.
But what do you guys think? I mean, what do you think is going to happen at the border? I mean, it's gonna be effective. I mean, this guy Homan, he looks pretty, convinced that he will do
6 million in El Salvador.
6 million.
It's like you were suggesting, unless Trump tackles the problems going the other way, the demand, the intelligence agencies. You remember Obama's notorious gun running operation, Fast and Furious, to deliver weapons to the cartel.
Right.
And what was the fucking justification for that? I can't remember.
They will track
in their clever heads.
Yeah, it was
They
awful.
would track them.
They would track the weapons and find them.
Yeah, right.
Sure, right.
Probably Bobby Kennedy will be in charge of easing, or at least trying to tackle the underlying problem of addiction, right? Is bad health and,
Yeah, and I know he's also been to the border. He's concerned about it too.
And he himself was a victim of that as well, right? He was an addict for some time, right?
Yeah, he did heroin in his youth.
Right?
Yeah.
So he kind of understands. So Maja will probably, he could be more effective if he goes in that direction of just reducing the number of substance abuse.
And I hope it works, and I hope they make some progress. But the U.S. is it's like we're seeing overseas in the Middle East, vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine. Mexico will be similar. There'll be all these good intentions, I think, and not just Mexico, but the U.S. policy towards all of its southern neighbors. All it takes is one of those three-letter agencies to provoke this or that.
You don't see any immigrants. I mean, obviously Mexico's a big country, but you don't see. Do you see an increase in immigrants? People from you see an increase in them coming through, even in were you in Mexico City or near Mexico?
Yeah, near Mexico City.
Okay, so would they? Because there's this route, that they come from through Central America.
They have these huge caravans just crossing through.
Yeah, and you see them.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's the increase is noticeable.
Wow.
And quite honestly, I don't believe the average Mexican is much happy about that. Right? You get to see a lot of from all over the place, but mainly you don't see from Asia or a lot of from Africa. Actually, you see more Latin American people and Haitian as well. So.
And they're all heading to the border, basically.
Well, that's the thing, right? Ultimately they are, but it can take some time before they reach there. So you can
stop
see
for a while.
them. Yeah, they'll stop for a while. They'll get some help, and then they will continue. But either way, I don't believe that even in this situation, which is understood by everyone that is temporary, I don't believe that an average Mexican is much happy about the situation.
Yeah, no doubt. And a lot of them are in America already. Well, we estimated something up to, there could be up to 20, 30 million.
Since when?
Well, over the last, 10 plus years.
10 plus years.
But there's up to 30 million non-American citizens, like people who are not actually registered, who are illegal. 30 million illegal immigrants in America. They're almost about a tenth of the population.
About a tenth. So the population in the United States is 330?
It's somewhere between 320 to 30, yeah. But you could add another 30 million on that.
And 30 on top. Wow.
And similar in some European countries.
Right.
Compared to the official estimates.
UK and France.
Throw an extra 10 million on, So around the country, depending on the country, but, maybe, at least, in a lot of places, at least 10% of the population are now...
Officially aren't there.
Yeah, they're not on the books. They're not part of the official statistics of the population.
But they are being helped, right? Socially.
Yeah, they're getting benefits and everything, yeah. Same as in America.
Wow. So what do you think is happening? I mean, they are there, they are getting helped, but they are not, the census is not considering them.
Yeah, part of the census just isn't going there. I think censuses are just, are fairly, not very accurate anyway, because it depends if people actually, it's open to, it's optional to respond, right? You're not forced to respond to a census, people can come around and either send you a letter or can come around and knock on your door and ask. But if you just close your door,
right,
you don't get counted.
Right,
they don't know. And
That's
a lot
true.
of people would be like, especially if you're not officially documented, you're probably not going to respond to somebody from the government who's come to check on.
Yeah. I believe that those government workers they will just have an estimate about how many people are there.
Yeah. So, and when they can't get accurate numbers, they'll just do it based on estimated growth over a normal period of time, but they're not accounting for.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyway, it's crazy. Were you looking at comments, or was anybody saying anything interesting?
Yeah, someone wants to talk about China and its constructive role, but it's going to have to wait.
China and its constructive role?
Yes.
Chinese people, good people.
Yeah. When you talk about China's constructive role, another question about Mexican cartels. Are some cartels aligned with the CIA?
Well, we just said that.
Yes, for sure. China will be another day. China is still waters running deep. In other words, they keep their cards real close to their chest. Obviously, Russia's one thing, but China, if they have similar types of weapons, oh my God.
They must have a version of Oresnik by now.
They might. Or they will soon. The Russians will cooperate with them, I guess.
Yeah, we'll talk next week or whatever about China. There's some interesting ideas about China because it holds so many dollars, It holds it's the largest holder of American kind of currency or American securities, whatever. And there was some trade done by China recently where they basically acted as if they were the U.S. Treasury, where they offered bonds, like as in American dollar bonds, basically, like as if the U.S. government was issuing them. So i.e. people would buy them, i.e. people invest and buy these, and they were denominated in the dollars that China has. And the big thing is, so a bunch of countries can do that, but the interesting thing about this trade, and it was only for about like 2 billion or something like that, so it was very small. But the interesting thing about it was that they offered it at the same interest rate as the U.S. Treasury.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like the U.S. Treasury offers, asks for, basically people to buy bonds, give them money, and that's secured by the fact that it's the U.S. government that they're buying it from, so it's fairly safe, right? So they only give you a small percentage interest on it. They only pay you back a small interest, 0.012% or something like that. But most other countries that have done that, they're much less secure, and you get a lot higher interest back when you buy American dollar bonds from
for profit
from someone else, some other country. You get it's more risky, so you get a better return, But China issued them at the same rate as the Federal Reserve issues them as if it basically was a
So-
so it's
so-
using its massive reserves, and that was a sign of the confidence that investors have in the Chinese economy and its ability to issue American dollars, essentially.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that they copied that as well?
Yeah.
China copied that as well?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. They're copying everything, yeah.
Now we take your Federal Reserve.
We pretty much make everything the Americans consume anyway, so we may as well just pretend we're like your Federal Reserve.
Well, wasn't it Hillary Clinton who said in another leaked cable from WikiLeaks, where she was going to sit down with some Chinese ambassador or something, he said, something about Chinese being our bankers. Can't remember what it was.
Well, they are, yeah.
How do you tell off or
How do you scold your banker?
how do you get one over?
Yeah.
Because they're like that was like in the late 2000s, so
Yeah.
even then.
Yeah.
Well, they do have a nuclear economic weapon there, no?
Yeah,
if
for
they're
sure.
doing that.
Yeah. Well, it was always part of the problem was that like China can't really do much in terms of directly to undermine the US dollar because it holds so many dollars itself. It has like $1 trillion American dollars basically that
Yeah.
it actually
lot.
holds. So I mean, it would lose big time if the dollar tanked as well. If the dollar wasn't a solid reserve
They're
currency.
exposed as well, yeah.
Yeah, so it's people were suggesting that this was their inventive way around it, that they would just basically, instead of trying to get rid of dollars, they would start buying more dollars and then issuing them to everybody else around the world.
I do have one last question, if I may. So this time around, Trump wasn't that abrasive about China.
Yeah.
He wasn't, right? I mean,
No.
he was more focused on other things. But
Yeah.
do you think he is still, as interested in waging this tariff war with them?
I think, to be honest, I think that's much better than waging actual war.
Right.
You know what I mean? Which is what the US, the kind of deep state, US establishment tends to do. Like they if you don't play along with them economically, then they'll
He tweeted this today.
then they'll wage war on you.
Yeah, tariff war. But will he go beyond that, The idea that the BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over, all caps. We require a commitment from these countries, i.e. Brazil, Russia, China, India, that they will neither create a new BRICS currency nor back away from any other currency to replace the mighty US dollar, or they will face 100% tariffs and should
100%,
expect
wow.
to say goodbye to selling into the wonderful US economy, caps. They can go find another, quote, sucker. There is no chance that the BRICS will replace the US dollar in international trade, and any country that tries should wave goodbye to America.
Wow.
100% tariffs.
Yeah.
Obviously, that is exactly what any BRICS currency would be trying to do anyway.
Yeah.
Trying to wave goodbye
It's
to America.
a long ways off, like a BRICS reserve currency or being a basket of currencies replacing the dollars. It is a long way off, but obviously the fact that he's talking about it means that
Yeah.
it's something that's
On his
concerning to him.
mind.
And I mean, it's far better than he just says, "Look, we're going to be, the world is a marketplace. America's a seller and a buyer in a marketplace. It's competing in a marketplace, and we're going to compete aggressively, and then see how that turns out." Well, good, yeah. At least no one dies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least you don't destabilize countries and overthrow governments, So it's much better that he tries to win big for America that way. I mean, he might find out that it's not so easy anymore, and it might be a problem for America, because America's so used to getting its way economically,
all the time.
getting the lion's share of everything. It may not be able to survive on a smaller diet, but we'll have to wait and see. And that's exactly what we'll do. And Neil's itching to get going.
I got to get going.
Neil's got to get going.
I'm
So anyway,
late.
thanks,
So-
Antonio, for
Thank you
being
for
here
having me.
and
Thank you,
for
Toño.
Thank you.
contributing. Thanks, guys, for watching, listening, and chatting. Don't forget to smash all the buttons. We'll be back next week with another show on whatever nonsense has been going on between now and then. So until then, have a good week. See ya.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Adios.
Can't stop the signal now.